neurological childhood disorders, what can be done about it, and then also to give you guys some tips, some things that just takeaways like nutrition advice, some exercises that are good for different specific categories, and we'll have plenty of those examples for you guys. So we'll take a little bit of an educational approach, and I'll just take one slide back. So that's me on the top. That's one of my wedding photos. And I have an older sister on the top left. She did not go through brain balance. Those are her children. Older brother who also didn't go through brain balance. That's him and his daughters. Down in the center, my stepdad, Eric, my mother, Anna, and my little sister, Anastasia. Anastasia and my younger brother, Alexei, who's on the far right, looking very dapper, they both went through the brain balance program back in 2011. And just really quick story how we found out about brain balance. You know, many times it's just a very thin thread that we're able to meet somebody who changes our life or be involved in either a church or some sort of community group that really has a big impact on us. And brain balance has had a tremendous impact on my family's life. And, you know, for the past 5 or 6 years, I've been helping families with our same journey, and, you know, we changed thousands of lives. So the story with my younger brother, when he was 5 or 6 years old, the pediatrician noticed that there were some things going on with him socially and emotionally. And so my mom was asking, hey, is there something going on? And he said, you know what, I think it may be Asperger's, which is kind of shoved under the autism umbrella. And so he said, you know, I don't do the diagnosing for that. Let's go see a specialist. And of course she did that. When she went to see a specialist, the specialist mentioned, hey, we think it's something different. I think it was sensory processing disorder is what she called it. And just like anything else, sometimes you want a second opinion. And my mom did go get a second opinion. And the next doctor said it was something completely different than the first two had said. And so for her, she didn't really feel confident in moving forward in any direction because we didn't know what's actually going on. And I think for her, just like many parents that come to us in brain balance, they have great intentions. They want to help their child, you know, live a happy, successful life. They want their children many times to have a better life than they had. And so in her position, she was afraid. She was in a holding pattern. She was like, I don't know what to do. And one of the doctors had called back and started leaving messages and putting some pressure on my mom. And she was calling back saying, hey, you need to come in and do this blood testing and this hair testing, otherwise there's going to be issues. And my mom was scared. You know, she was like, you know, I don't know what to do. And her friend who was a doctor who actually owned the Brain Balance, which had very recently opened back in 2010 or 11, said, hey, go check out Brain Balance. And my mom said, sure, you know. And she went off to do the assessment, which is where we determine whether or not the student's a good candidate for our program. And it's a full 3 to 4 hour sensory motor and neuroacademic assessment that covers all of the different functions in the brain. Balance, rhythm and timing, gross motor, fine motor, core strength, the list goes on. And all of the exercises or activities that we work on are relative to different areas in the brain, different functions. So they did the assessment, long story short, and going over the results of the assessment, they let my mom know that my little brother was going to need 3 rounds. So basically 9 months of sessions, which is pretty extreme. And at the time, my parents didn't have very much money. They were, my stepdad didn't have a job, and he was the main breadwinner at that point. I think they were making it by on consulting, and my mom was breeding Yorkies to try to stay afloat. And I think they were actually pretty close to losing their house. They were getting pretty close to being foreclosed on. And Brain Balance, the program, the value that it offers is exponential, in my opinion. But at the end of the day, when families don't have the finances to do it, then they can't take advantage of the full program. Now, taking one step back outside of the story, how I operate in my center is if a family, for whatever reason, can't make the time commitment to come down to the center 3 times a week, or if they can't afford to do the program, there's just no possible way, then I will still offer to do what's called a pre-screen for free, where we check some of those key indicators to see if a student would benefit from the things that we do. And even if they can't afford to do our program, I'm happy to give them exercises and activities, nutrition tips they can do at home now so they can get the ball rolling. So that's a resource that I offer to daycare, schools, other people that are in the health and wellness community. And that's something I'm also willing to extend to you guys at CC4C, just as a way to make an impact on the community. Doing that doesn't cost us anything. And if anything, it will, make a difference for the kids. And that is literally the only thing that we care about. Brain Balance as a business is not a super profitable thing because we're looking to permanently eliminate the problems altogether. So once we solve the problem, there's no repeat customer. The problem's fixed, the student goes on and lives a happy life, and they move on. And so we rely more on referrals or word of mouth, that kind of thing. So anyway, so my little brother, they said he needed basically $18,000 worth of Brain Balance sessions, and my parents didn't have the money. And of course, they went home and said, "Hey, we got to think about it. What are we going to do?" And this is our sort of story, our God story, or the universe coming together, however you want to look at it. It was a week after my parents did the assessment for my little brother and got the results that my mom's father, who was a Marine, he went from private to colonel. He was in for about 40 years. He had recently passed away from cancer. And my mom was part of some special insurance. And it was a week after they did the assessment that my mom got a check in the mail for right about $18,000. And just the timing of it, the fact that we didn't have any resources, that's why I say that's our God story, or how the universe kind of came together to make that happen. And again, it's that very thin thread that brought us into Brain Balance. And after 3 to 6 months of my mom sitting on the couch just like a regular parent out in our lobby, seeing the changes with all the students that were coming through, she was like, "Wow, this is really neat." And I think the manager, or the director, is basically what the position is, that was running the center at the time. My mom didn't really care for that person. I'm not sure what it was. I don't have any details on that. But so her friend who owned the Brain Balance, she was chatting with him about it. And he was having trouble running his practice and the Brain Balance at the same time. And he told my mom, "Do you want to run it?" And she said, "Yeah." And so that's how we got into Brain Balance. That's just some background on our experience. And of course, my little brother went through the program. Afterwards, he didn't have that diagnosis of Asperger's. He was able to socialize. And unfortunately, he did pass away a couple of years ago. He was hit by a car riding his bike. You guys might have seen that on the news. And he was, at his memorial, he was one of the most impactful young men I've ever heard of. I don't know if I'll be able to live up to that standard. Teachers and students alike all said that he was very caring. He would ask them how their day was when nobody else would do it. He befriended students that even didn't like him and would verbally express, "Hey, I don't like you. I don't want to hang out with you." But he would still treat them as a friend and be nice to them and try to hang out with them. And the one young man that did that to my little brother, they actually found out later that he had brain cancer, and that's sort of why he was having behavioral issues. But just so our family was, and also my little brother went off to be a phenomenal ballet dancer. You can look up on YouTube Alexei, and it's Alexei. Bauereis is his last name, Bauereis. And you can see his school put together a phenomenal compilation of some of his performances, and just the way he moves, how graceful he was, all the motor skills and the brain function that's involved in him being able to do those activities. Without Brain Balance, there's absolutely no way he could have done that. So anyway, so that's sort of my background, how we got involved with Brain Balance, our journey. And so now I'll move in a little bit more to explaining sort of what Brain Balance is. And again, we'll take more of an educational approach. And at the very least, seeing this new, exciting information should reveal to you that yes, we know how to categorize these issues that students have, either learning problems, immune system issues, behavior problems, anxiety issues, ADHD. There are parts of our brain that control those emotions, and they control those different self-control functions, the social awareness piece. And if they're not matured, then the student really doesn't have that function. And that's what Brain Balance does, is we mature those areas so the student, and it stays that way once we've matured it, so the student can move past those issues permanently. So we'll move into a little bit of, and now Brain Balance, when we opened, there were only 14 locations. We were the 14th center in the United States. Most of the other centers were on the East Coast. Now there's upwards of 105 centers across the U.S. There's other ones in San Antonio, Dallas, Houston. There's 3 in our area. We've been in operation the longest. I know that as far as the skill and handling the customer service and making sure that the kids get the very best outcomes is something that we're experts at because we've been doing it for so long, and we've had family members go through the program. So yeah, brain balance centers, they're all across the U.S. We help students out, and it really could be any kind of challenge that they come to us with. The only thing that we can't, in my opinion, permanently correct is something like Down syndrome, or if there's some sort of genetic deformity where something's physically missing from their brain. We can't make promises or big guarantees on changes in that. But even in those cases with Down syndrome, early on in development, they don't get enough movement, they don't get enough stimulation to certain parts of their brain, so we definitely could benefit them. But at that rate, they would still have Down syndrome. We would just be able to improve their functions. So that's kind of just the range of students that we work with, was why I was mentioning all that good stuff. So now we're getting into a little bit of heady information. And if you guys have any questions about this, or if you just want to chime in a comment, or if you guys agree, disagree with whatever we're sharing with you, feel free to let me know. That way we can give you either good feedback, or if you have some sort of doubt, or hey, that doesn't make sense to me, either through email after this presentation or during the presentation. Either way, I'm happy to address any questions. And myself, just by nature, I'm a skeptic. And so if I don't see something work, then, or if I don't feel that I actually need it, then I don't want it. And so I always like to help parents understand that the things that we're talking about doing with students, being able to eliminate the signs and symptoms that go along with something like dyslexia or ADHD, in some cases even autism, like with my little brother who had, technically had Asperger's before he went through the program and afterwards didn't. Those are some pretty big promises. And I think it does the parents justice when we put ourselves in their shoes and understand, hey, you're going to have to explain this to me because I don't see how this is actually going to help me. So that's my goal, is to show you guys what the root causes of some of these issues are and to really educate you. So, and there is when we talk about this developmental iceberg, what we're essentially talking about is the sequence in which the brain matures. If you look at the very bottom, primitive reflexes, also baby reflexes, like when we put something in the palm of a baby's hand and it locks down, we look at 8 of those infant or baby reflexes, and they should be gone, 100% gone by 12 to 18 months of age. A few of them disappear between 6 to 9 months. Some others stick around from 8 to about 18 months. And we need them. They're like God's little training wheels to get our motor systems developing. And without them, we wouldn't develop fine motor. We wouldn't develop any other system that comes after it. So those primitive reflexes are key when it comes to understanding why is it that a child's brain doesn't mature appropriately in the first place. So in our program, and this is what I do for a pre-screen for students, is we do a primitive check. We check all 8 of those infant or baby reflexes, and the things that we can measure, and we can tell you if they're 0%, which is where they should have been at 12 to 18 months, or if they're 25, 50, 75, or 100% based on a physical response. So for example, if we're testing for the palmar reflex, which is the grasp reflex, basically what we'll do is have the student hold their hands open and relaxed, close their eyes, and we're going to stroke their palm. And if we see little muscle twitches on stimulation, that will be a 25%. And if the hand locks all the way down, that will be 100%. I won't cover all 8 of them immediately, but we'll go through them here in a second. So it is extremely, extremely important to understand that if those primitive reflexes are not gone, and we will test adults and they'll still have 1, 2, maybe all 8 of those infant reflexes still present, which means that in a reflex, just like if the doctor hits your knee, your leg kicks out, it's an automatic electrical impulse that comes from somewhere in your brain that creates a movement or elicits a response. And when those are still strong, they actually prevent all of the layers after that from maturing fully. So we got, in order, primitive reflexes, senses, and when we talk about sensory processing disorder, okay, if a student's senses aren't matured, you can see how there will be some dysfunction. The 3 that are most important are going to be sense of touch or tactile, visual, and we look at 8 different eye reflexes, and then auditory processing. So those 3 are key for learning, for behavior, for overall function of the brain, because that's how our brain is programmed, is through our senses. So we've got primitive reflexes, senses, then we have motor skills, so fine motor, gross motor, then cognition, and that should start developing more or less around age 3. Then we see academics, socialization, and behavior, which those are the last parts of the brain to mature. And so parents, and the numbers are astronomical. I don't even need to try to sensationalize it. Back in the 1950s, it was 1 in 10,000 people had autism. Now it's 1 in 40. And on the surface, you may think, okay, well, we have better diagnostic equipment or techniques now. And those differences in the techniques of the diagnosis now make up for 700% of the 10,000% increase that we've seen with cases of students that have autism. And so the problem is on the rise, and there's a couple of things that cause that. So if, for example, there's something that happens in pregnancy, stress in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy is actually something that is sort of a precursor to cause autism. There may be a genetic predisposition for one side of the person's brain not to mature. And then I think one of the biggest things is now both parents have to work in most cases. And so, maybe 40, 50 years ago, we would have one parent work, one parent stay at home. And so they could play with the child. They could spend time with them. They could stimulate them through movement. They could keep them active. They could stay on top of them. And now, because, both parents have to work to afford to live, we find that there's a lot less stimulation going on. And the most critical time is in pregnancy and immediately afterward, which is where those primitive or infant reflexes lie. And if the brain doesn't use them enough, then it causes problems all the way up the chain. So that's just a quick education on sort of where the problems are coming from. And it answers the question that in my opinion, no medical professional will be able to answer for you. They'll just say, oh, well, there's video games now, or, whatever, surface level answer they can give you. And at Brain Balance, we're the experts. We know how to tell you exactly not just which layer, but it's a combination of layers that are not matured and how they work together that present the symptoms that you see. So does anybody have any questions or any comments on this part before I move on? Okay, very good. Okay, so now I'm actually going to show you what all of these primitive reflexes are that we check for and give you a couple of quick examples. I'll try not to bore you guys to death with the science. So if you're a left brain person like myself, then you would probably enjoy this. If you're a right brain person, you'll probably enjoy the examples or the stories more. So we'll cover these 2 at a time. This first one is called the rooting reflex. And for an infant or a baby, when their cheek is stimulated, they turn to and they start latching on. So there's an automatic reflex that comes from their mouth muscles, and signs that may be there without even us doing the physical test. And when we test for it, we do cat whiskers like this on the student's cheek. And we're looking for either little muscle twitches, would be a mild or 25% retention, or if we get a full on or some kind of like that, then that will be a 100% retention. And so going back to the signs that you see there, kids that chew on things a lot, maybe put things in their mouth over and over, maybe picky eaters. And that seems to be probably one of the most common examples is the picky eater. And if we think about a baby in development, you can try to feed them the food and sometimes they'll dodge it. And they don't have anything else to go on except for texture. That's how they choose to eat or not eat. It also messes with articulation. So students that have speech delays, kids that have an oral fixation, or they may chew on things a lot, like I mentioned earlier. And if that's there, and again, these 8 primitive reflexes we're going to go through, every one of them is tied into all of the senses and all of the motor skills that come after it. So there are more than these 8, but these are the 8 that are most critical for the brain to mature, for the student's social, emotional, and just overall well-being. The next one is the startle reflex, or the Moreau reflex. And this is the fight or flight response that kicks in. So kids that get startled by loud noises, or and for an infant or a baby, when their head's not supported, they go, and they'll tuck back up and they start crying all of a sudden. It's because it's a survival reflex. Their fight or flight kicks in. It's a knee-jerk response that keeps them from falling. And when the student has that, and again, we measure anywhere from 0 to 100%. A lot of kids are anywhere from 50 to 100% that come to us and they're looking for help in whatever category. They may be struggling with focus. And with the adrenaline and cortisol, which are our stress and alertness hormones, on high, because that startle reflex is still present, it makes it more difficult for the student to control their emotions, makes it more difficult for them to sit still and focus. And let's say there's a little background noise or distraction, their brain's going to want to know, what is that? They're going to look over and, and again, there are signs and symptoms that go with these, but even if we didn't have any of those signs or symptoms, when we go to physically check for them, if they're still there, then that means that the systems that come after it aren't matured properly. So I want to try to remind us not to get caught up in the weeds. We can always keep the developmental iceberg chart in mind. And even though I'm going to describe these reflexes and what they do, just so you have a picture in your mind of what they are and you can understand what comes after it, let's remember that no matter what, if we see the signs or not, if they're still there, all of the systems that come after are going to have some sort of issue. Moving on to the next two. We already talked about the palmar or the grasp. So we have kids that may want to hold on to things a lot. They may have a weak grip. It's going to affect their fine motor. So both the rooting reflex and the grasp reflex, believe it or not, have to do with fine motor of any system in the body, even small eye muscles. Because again, those are the small muscle movement control parts of our brain that develop after that. There's like my nephew, for example, and my wife and I were paying for him to do the program. He has never been able to tie his shoes. He's 10 years old, and about 2 weeks into the program, he started being able to tie his shoes. And I'll tell you more about him in a minute, but let's move on to the next primitive reflex. So the next one, the asymmetrical tonic neck reflex, or the ATNR for short, is if the baby's asleep and their head's turned this way, this arm's tucked and this one's out straight, or if their head's turned that way, their arms are out the other way. And I'm sure we've all seen that with a baby that's napping. And what that means is when they turn their head, the rest of their body wants to follow. So they can't do those cross lateral activities. So crossing your midline, in child development books, we talk a lot about tummy time. We talk about things like crossing your midline, and being able to cross your midline demonstrates that our brain is specializing left and right hemisphere like it's supposed to. And we can do an activity quickly and easily. We can transfer it to the other side of our body. This definitely translates to the students who have trouble reading. Dyslexia would be a really good example, because on this side of the page, my right brain is looking at it. And by the time it gets here, it has to switch to left brain. And then when we drop down to the next line, it has to switch back to right, left, back to right. So our brain's ability to go back and forth across our midline is extremely important for overall physical coordination, the specialization of left and right hemisphere, overall maturity of the brain. And there's a number of other signs that come with it. And that's one of those things that we test for. And if it's still there, again, all the systems that come after it are going to have some sort of struggle, or they won't be able to fully mature. Moving on to number 5 and 6 here. These two, the tonic labyrinth is one you wouldn't off the top of your head think or know to look for. So it's a balance reflex that for a baby gets them ready to lean forward so they can roll over. And when we talk about balance, balance is functionally in our brain, our ability to balance has everything to do with our ability to regulate our emotions, understand our personal bubble and space, be able to relate to others socially, and to have good balance and posture. Toe walking, I'm going to jump right to that example. So, and I know that you guys have seen this before, where you have a student who walks on their toes a lot. And what this is, this reflex, it makes us feel like we're leaning forward. And so what happens in the brain, if our body thinks we're leaning forward, we go up on our toes to compensate for that. And we've seen students that have had to have Achilles tendon surgery due to the fact that they're walking on their toes. And I'm not against correcting the problem if they need to go that far, but knowing what we know, we want to share this information so we can help people understand there are exercises that eliminate these primitive or baby reflexes. Once they're gone, they're gone. So I feel like not only addressing the emergency, hey, the Achilles tendon is too tight, we've got to have surgery on it, but let's also fix the root cause of why it's there in the first place, so the student doesn't have to deal with that stuff anymore. So the next one, I'm going to move on to the next primitive reflex. The STNR, this is the crawling reflex. For a baby, of course, we know they need to crawl for a certain amount of time before they walk. And we see many parents, not every parent, either the student skips crawling and goes right to walking, or they crawled for too long, or they crawled they crawled too little of an amount of time. And at first it looks like, oh man, my kid's getting ahead and we're going to have a little athlete, or they're going to be super, good at sports. And what we're here to tell you is no, that means that their brain, if they didn't do that appropriately or spend enough time crawling, their brain didn't get to use that reflex enough times for the systems that come after it to mature. And one issue that we see down there, kids that sit in a W position, I always like to use these because many times we've seen this stuff with kids, and I think back to early development, I think that even I, for a short time, would sit like this, where you sit and your legs are kind of bowed out to the side of you, and nobody really understands why is that happening. Well, it's because that crawling reflex is still present, and that affects hand-eye coordination, ability to focus on something close to us, focus on something far away, which of course affects learning. It affects our ability to read body language with other people. And again, signs and symptoms aside, if these are still there, then that means the rest of the brain didn't mature. The last two we're going to cover real quick, and then we'll kind of get out of the scientific weeds and we'll go a little bit more high level. And then we'll give you some takeaways, some exercises that are going to be good, and some nutrition tips and things that will help you guys out. Really could help anybody out. I think anybody could benefit from the stuff that we'll tell you guys here in a minute. So last two reflexes. One is the Landau. And this is, again, another one you probably wouldn't know off the top of your head, but if a baby is laying on their stomach and they lift their head and arms up, they can't do just head and arms. It's if they lift their head up, their feet come up at the same time. It's an automatic. And so when they lift their upper body, their lower body is automatically involved. So sometimes kids will have a difficult time, running or skipping. They may have trouble learning how to do those kind of things. And part of it's because when that reflex, just like when the doctor hits your knee and your leg kicks out, there's an automatic electrical impulse that as soon as the student moves their head back, their lower body wants to move at the same time. And they're not even aware of these things. It's just happening. So anyway, that's the second to last one. The last one I think we're going to cover here. Make sure there's the last one. Yes, it is the last one. Okay. The spinal galant reflex. So this is one I like to talk about with parents because the spinal galant reflex, if a baby's side is tickled, they'll curl in like that. And again, during our assessment, we want to stroke the student's side. If we get little muscle twitches on their back, it may have a 25% retention. Or if we get the full-on side lean like that, then that may be 100% still there. So it is a ticklish type reflex. So kids that are extremely ticklish, have trouble sitting still or concentrating, kids that are bothered by close tags or textures, and I know that's super common. Again, when we go talk about sensory processing disorder, loud noises, we can talk about the startle reflex, the closed tags or textures, which is a tactile thing. We can talk about the spinal galant reflex still being present. And the most interesting point I think on this is students that bedwet beyond the age of 5. And we've had students that are 12, 13, 14, 17 years old in our program that are still either wetting the bed or have bathroom control issues. And it's because that spinal galant reflex is still there. In some cases, it may also be caused by a left hemisphere weakness, which I'll get to that in a moment. But as we eliminate these primitive reflexes, the student's finally able to stop wetting the bed or having bathroom control issues. And this is phenomenal because parents come to us for some sort of pain. They're bothered by their student's focus. They're getting calls from the teacher. They feel bad for their student because they're trying so hard and their self-esteem and motivation is going away for education because they're not able to process things appropriately. And that's what they're coming to us for. And those are the problems that we do solve. Now, at the same time, when we go through with a fine-tooth comb and ask all these questions and understand the parents' concerns, they'll let on that, yeah, they have closed tags or textures issues, or yeah, they're bothered by loud noises, or yeah, they're still wetting the bed. And we can confidently tell them that we can eliminate that problem for them too. So it's not, and brain balance, I think other modalities, vision therapy, they work on just visual reflexes, which the vision therapists are just now starting to work on primitive reflexes. So we're, still a few years ahead of that, but they only use it in an effort to develop the visual reflexes, which is important. So it's just something that's important to understand that we're not addressing just one problem. We are maturing the entire brain, and that solves a bunch of different problems. At the very minimum, improves the quality of life of the student. At very best, in some cases, we completely wipe out the issues altogether, and the student never has any issues after that. And that's how it was for my family. So now we're out of the weeds. I'll try to give you guys a mental break for just a second. Were you guys following along or tracking with what we were talking about there?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Very good. Okay, good. And are you guys thinking of some students? Are you seeing some examples of where that you've seen those kind of things before?
Yes, I was going to ask you about the last one that you discussed, the spinal gaunt. It says the assists in birth process.
Huh?
So the purpose of that. So
Kind of wiggling down the canal.
yeah. So if they were C-section,
Exactly.
then they don't. Do you see more of that with C-section babies?
Yes, we do. Now, what I'd like to do is take a step back, and so many times parents want to know, well, why does my child have these primitive reflexes and other students don't? The C-section is going to play a part in it. It can't, in my opinion, it's never just the C-section or just nutrition and pregnancy. Most of the time, there's a genetic predisposition somewhere up in the genetic pool. Great grandparents, grandparents. In many cases, it's the parents. Like my mom, she is super right brain dominant and very left brain weak. And my stepdad, Eric, and they were the mother and father of my little brother and sister who went through the program. My stepdad, Eric, we like to say he has two left brains. Super smart, PhD from Rice, MBA from UT, not as good with people skills. So anyway, so in my opinion, usually the reason these stick around is because there's a genetic predisposition for it to be there in the first place. The environmental factors, not enough movement, not enough stimulation. And then if we threw in something like nutrition or stress and pregnancy, and then also having a C-section, that yes, it does have a lot to do with, because that spinal gaunt reflex is a postural reflex, which actually starts replacing the primitives. It's kind of one of those ones that goes away 9 to 18 months. It's first activated when going through the birth canal. So if it's never really activated appropriately, then the student won't have as much of an opportunity to use that reflex at full strength. And in development, to answer another question, so going back to the grasp reflex. So let's say a baby having no problems, their brain is balanced and normal development. Let's say they need to grasp something and then start wiggling their fingers or doing independent finger movements. Let's say it was a total of 2,000 times they needed to do that, and the reflex goes away because the rest of our brain matures and it takes over that. For a student whose sense of touch isn't developing and their body may not detect the stimuli, or for example, with the spinal gaunt reflex, they didn't get to use it initially coming out of the birth canal, then their body won't activate the reflex. And that's what needs to happen, is it needs to be activated a certain number of times. And for a student whose sense of touch isn't developing and they can't use the reflex at full strength, that's another part of why those primitive reflexes stick around more for some students, because they need more repetitions. They may need 10,000 times to use the reflex. That's, again, a very huge part of our program is eliminating those. So, did that answer your question on the?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
On the birth process thing? Okay. Very good. Yeah, and it's really funny because we see all these things, and a lot of times we want to think, kids nowadays are not disciplined as well. There's video games, or we want to blame the internet or whatever we want to do. And I think as humans, and if we go back to that list of development, the last thing to develop is behavior. And when we say a student is being lazy, or they don't care, or they just need to get over it, in a lot of ways, that's giving the student too much credit, because if these systems in their brain haven't matured fully, then they don't have the functional capability to do that. And that's my hope, is the information that we share with you guys today shows you that there are ways to eliminate these problems for the child, these hurdles, so that they can live a happy life, so that they don't have to constantly be prodded or managed, or be driven by shame or fear or anger to actually accomplish something. Anyway, so next thing that we're going to talk about. So that was the developmental lens that we look at brain balance through. The other side that we cover is hemispheric. And we're at 11:39, so I just want to make sure we're doing good on time. So this is how our brain is organized. And some of you guys may be familiar with this, others maybe not. I've seen some little articles, and one of our students who is 19, who is left brain weak, she's in college, having trouble focusing, cannot remember things that she just read, and she was becoming concerned. And of course, we were able to help her out with all that. But about a month and a half in the program, one of her professors was saying, "Oh, the left brain, right brain thing, that's a myth. That's not even real." Well, I would say that person doesn't really know what they're talking about, because the left brain is the conscious brain. It's responsible for things like memory, picking up on small details. It's very linear and logical, and very black and white. And so when we think about a student who has Asperger's, that is a social, basically a social awkward diagnosis, where they really struggle with eye contact. They don't know what to say, how to say it. It gives them a lot of anxiety. And it's because they're so left brain dominant. They're so detail, fact, logic. That's all they have here and now in the moment. They don't really have any of that social, emotional. Um, so left brain is all learning. So details, memorization, it's very logical, fine motor. And the left brain controls the right side of the body. That's why most people are right-handed. Any volitional motor activity is done with the left side of the brain. And the handedness thing, if a student is a lefty, it doesn't affect the hemisphericity. That is just a genetic thing. And it usually is from either the parents or grandparents. Somebody up there is a lefty if the student does actually come out that way. Now, side note, if the student doesn't have a preferred hand, and I'm not talking ambidextrous where they're equally good on both hands. I'm talking they write with this hand, but they throw and catch a ball with that hand. That's a mixed dominance, and that means their brain didn't choose one side like it was supposed to early in development. So now we have right brain trying to do some left brain jobs, and same thing, we can have left trying to do right. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but this is just to show you guys, this graphic here is basically to describe to you guys what the purpose of our program is. And we want to make sure that both sides of the brain are matured. We want to make sure that they're able to work together. And I know I described left brain. I'm going to do right brain really quick for you guys. So the right side of the brain is the only thing that should be developing age 0 to 3, which is where most of the delays start. So, because 0 to 3 is right brain, 3 to 6 is left brain. And at age 3, kids start asking why and how, and they repeat things a lot. That's what the left brain does. It repeats, it mimics, it likes routine, repetition, sameness. And to parents, it can be kind of annoying, but that's really a good thing. That shows that their brain is developing. Now, if we have a student who's starting to talk or starting to be able to read letters at 18 months of age, that's not good because that means their left brain started growing way too early. So I'll get to that in a minute. But going back to when we say right brain, it's the right hemisphere of the brain. The right brain is nonverbal. So it picks up on body language. It can read social cues. It has the ability to kind of gut feelings, any sense, so touch, vision, auditory, emotions, they're all experienced on the right hemisphere of the brain. And so even if it wasn't for the spinal galant reflex, in some cases we'll have a student who's right brain weak, and that's where those sensory issues are coming from because that's all that should be developing and connecting up until age 3. So that's the purpose of our program, and that's what we do on a consistent basis is we find out which areas of the child's brain aren't matured. And then we have a system that forces those areas that couldn't mature previously by eliminating those primitive reflexes, adding in nutrition, and focusing on just the weak hemisphere. That's how we end up correcting the problem. And so that's the purpose of our program. What an imbalanced brain looks like. So I'll jump to both. I'll start with left brain. If we have a student who's left brain weak, like my nephew, who I mentioned earlier, my wife and I, we're literally paying for him to do the brain balance program, same price everybody else pays. And, sometimes parents come and they're asking for a discount and I'm like, look, this program is worth 8 times what we charge for it. I paid the same price as everybody else. So it's like, we understand the value in it. And my nephew, Ian, he is in 5th grade and behaviorally last year, he got kicked out of 3 daycares, YMCA. He was getting phone calls home, if not every day, at least 2-3 times a week. Really frustrated the mom, and the parents didn't really have the financial means to put it together and do the program. Plus, they didn't really have the belief that I do, that we know we can correct this issue. So in 5th grade, Ian was just learning his letters still. He was not past that. Now, on the surface, he could socialize. He had decent focus. He could talk to you about movies, characters. He seems like a normal kid, like there's nothing wrong with him. But when you get him in the classroom, he just cannot learn. And he was diagnosed with a learning disorder a couple of years back. And so long story short, my wife and I, his mom and dad live with us, and we're not going to sit there and just watch that knowing that we can solve the problem. So we enrolled him in the program, and a month ago, he read his first book. And of course, we were so focused on the learning because we want him to be a successful person. That's our main thing. And we got him reading, and just over the Thanksgiving break, he's sitting there reading books on his own without any help. And we were just beside ourselves with joy because, if they weren't able to do it in 5 years, there's not really a good chance that they'd be able to move very far forward. And I actually we do a visit to the school and talk to the teachers as part of our program. And I recorded the school visit. He had a teacher who's been with him for 3 years, and she saw the changes. And then we have a brand new teacher. And what was really neat was the brand new teacher saw all those marks from last year, all the calls home, how he was getting kicked out of other programs, his behavior running out of the classroom. And she's like, are you sure this is the same kid? Because she wasn't seeing those problems at all. Now, the teacher who had been with him for 3 years obviously was very excited about the changes she was seeing with him behaviorally, his learning, and all that stuff. So that's what a left brain weakness looks like, is a student who, and when we say an imbalance in skills, that first little part, they're great or good at some things like sports, and they're really bad at some other things like learning, like Ian was. And the cliche of kind of the dumb jock, that's, in my opinion, a right brain dominant, because right brain is gross motor, legs, torso. They're going to be good at things like sports. And the learning, fine motor, small movement of the eye muscles, visual processing, memory, if those skills aren't there, the student's always going to struggle, you know. And maybe back in the day, if the kid was good enough, the coach would kind of make sure that he passed to keep him on the team. But nowadays, they're not having that. So that's what a left brain weakness looks like. And we see that probably about 20% of the time. Now, we can have a student who's left brain weak that has no learning problems. They're just so right brain dominant that they're very self-critical, because the right brain is the social, the self-awareness, and the emotional side of the brain. We could have a kid who has anxiety. That could be a right brain dominance. It could be a dominance or weakness. And so anyway, so those are some of the categories of left hemisphere weaknesses. And again, going back to how do we know it's one side of the brain versus the other? Well, 0 to 3 is right, 3 to 6 is left, 7 to 10 is right, and 11 to 14 is left, and the front of the brain starts developing. And when something throws off that balance, when they're flip-flopping back and forth, one side's not maturing and the other side takes off, that's what we're looking at here. Right brain weaknesses are ADHD, autism, Asperger's, OCD, ODD. I like to say anything that ends with D is a right brain weakness, or a kid who struggles to socialize. And now, on the contrast, they tend to be very smart. They can memorize things. Oh my gosh, they're like experts on trains or a specific category of dinosaur or anything that they take an interest in. But when you get them in the classroom, a lot of times they have trouble focusing. They're not getting along with other kids. And that was where my little brother was. He was actually sort of bilateral, where he was weak on both hemispheres, but mostly weak on the right side. So anyway, so that's what the problem is. And that's where all of these problems come from. And now we do see some students, like I mentioned, that struggle both focus, behavior, emotions, and learning. And in that case, we would always mature the social and self-awareness and self-control, which is the right brain, before we move left. So that's what we're talking about there. Here's some examples of left versus right weakness. And here in the next couple slides, we'll get into the tips and stuff we got for you guys. So early indicators. So if we say missed milestones, that's skipped crawling, went to walking, or crawled late, crawled not long enough. Mixed dominance, that example where they kind of do some things with this hand and that hand, but they're not really great at either of them. That's a mixed dominance. They can do the same thing with their eyes or their ears, which side they're processing sound or visually. And those primitive reflexes, if they're still there, you know, and we will test adults, doctors and scientists will still have these baby reflexes. I always like to throw my wife under the bus and tell everybody that she has the startle reflex. And when we're at the grocery store, if we're walking and somebody comes around the corner too fast, she doesn't expect them, she'll have that full-on startle reaction. And then at the house, when I come home, I have a habit now of knocking on the bedroom door and announcing, hey, I'm here, so she can hear me. Because if I come into the room and she's washing her face in the sink, and she catches me with her peripheral vision but didn't hear me, she's like, I thought somebody was going to kill me. And so I know that she has the startle reflex. And after much time and consideration, I've actually figured out she's a little bit left brain weak. But anyway, so those are your typical left brain weaknesses, which are all self-esteem, motivation, because positive emotions are left brain, negative emotions are right brain. You know, any of the learning stuff, verbal, memorization, auditory processing. Sometimes, and we see this often, where kids are great at math, but they're terrible at reading. That's a left brain weakness as well. Right brain weakness is all, you know, self-control. They tend to be hyperactive or anxious, because again, right brain is negative emotions, so fear, withdraw, gut feeling, social awareness. And if that's not there, it's like literally a piece of their brain is not communicating or not working. So those are your typical weaknesses. And this is, let me see how many more we have to go. Okay, yeah, very next slide, we're getting into the to-dos for you guys. Some little tips, and feel free to, you know, screenshot or do whatever you want to on the next couple of slides, because there's some really good activities. And based on what I've described, I feel like you guys should be able to figure out when you're talking to a student, wow, this student seems like they're probably left brain weak, or this student seems like they're probably right brain weak. So how we address that problem is, of course, we need to eliminate those primitive or baby reflexes. And in our DNA, we have certain codes that as those reflexes turn off, it turns off certain genes. And whenever we start maturing the senses and motor skills, it turns on other genes. And that's what allows us to continue to mature. So this is literally the way that's coded into our DNA. We're using that exact same method through all of the senses, motor skills, neuroacademics, because that's the sequence the brain matures in. We're doing it all at the same time. And because we're doing so many different things, visual, auditory, tactile, motor skills, balance, rhythm and timing, there's about 30 different sensory motor things we do. And then we do about 20 or 30 minutes of neuroacademic exercises. We're doing everything there's nothing more that you can do to stimulate or mature brain than what we do at Brain Balance. So we want to mature the weak side only, and we want to leave the side that's too strong alone. So for a left brain dominant student who would be right brain weak, the pleasure centers or the reward side of the brain is already too strong. So we don't want to dangle the carrot on them because they won't respond to it. Their brain is already too strong in that category. We actually would need to do more of a balance of takeaway, where if they don't do something, they'll lose out, because that drives right brain, which is fear withdrawal. Anyway, so we do a lot of stuff. We have a program that makes that happen, and it's measurable. So we can tell you every month. We started at age 3 in this category. Now we're up to age 5. And then these are the changes you should expect to see socially, emotionally, self-control wise, that are associated with, moving up to age 5, and then all the way up to the student's age or even higher if we can. So now we're going to get into okay, what can we do? These are some great activities. I think either category would be good for any kid. And I think the biggest takeaway I want to give you guys is movement. Resistance to gravity is how our brain grows from the time we're a baby moving forward. Of course, those primitive reflexes play a role, but when we have a student, let's say they're struggling to read, and that's one of the biggest things, and it's hurting their self-esteem. They may have low motivation or be depressed because the happy and joy emotions are all left brain, and if that side of the brain is not matured, and the negative emotions are much stronger because the right brain is dominant, well, the student's probably not going to be very happy. They're going to be shy. They're going to task avoid. So if we have a student that kind of fits that profile, these activities on the left would be phenomenal. They require a lot more fine motor, like jacks, using your hand, crochet, again, just like tying your shoestrings. It's one of those things that is very, very difficult for some kids to get and others not. So if we can, and even maybe find an easier way to do it, or actually hold the student's hands and kind of help them do it. And maybe after 10, 15, 20 times of kind of helping them do it, they may be able to build some muscle memory and start doing it on their own. And now when the student can tie their own shoes, now they feel a little bit more confident. Hey, they want to show mom, hey, look, I was able to tie my shoe. They're showing off, those are the kind of things that we want you guys to be able to do. Yeah, many examples: crossword puzzles, memory match games. And at a basic level, if we have a student who's would not really benefit from playing the game memory because they don't have that actual capability, well, let's do this. Let's get a deck of cards. Let's show them the card. Show them the King of Hearts, for example. Have them run down to the fence and back, and then tell you what card that they saw. And what that does is it gives the student the basic ability to recognize, hold the information, do some physical movement, which is what our program is based on, and then recall the information, which in many cases, without doing something that basic, we won't ever get the student to move forward. So it's things like that we can step back and give the student something that'll help them get to that next level and get to that next level. So Legos in the center, based on which hemisphere we are maturing, we call students lefties if they're left weak, or righties if they're right weak. Righties tend to love Legos. They're great, oh man, because it's fine motor and that's what the left brain does. So if we're now I'm going to switch over to right brains. So if we have a student who struggles with focus or socializing or self-control, balance, if they're not aware of their surroundings, they tend to bump into things a lot. That's more of a right brain weak student. And things like yoga. So, now we're giving you an explanation of why does yoga benefit some people so greatly, because there are several senses working at the same time. Obviously visual to see where you're at. You have your balance, of course. Then you also have tactile. So if you're, let's say you're doing a downward dog, your hands are pushing into the ground. They're getting input back, which is sending signals to your brain. at the same time as you are stimulating those proprioceptors, which are balance nerves that are in our brain. You're stimulating your inner ear balance, and they're having to demonstrate control of their body. So those are some things that, yoga, anything that involves gross motor. So that's kind of the rule of thumb. Left brain is fine motor, the game perfection. Those kind of things are great. Right brain is going to be more running, bike riding, martial arts, dance. Oh man, dance is awesome. Now I know when I was a young man, everybody would dance and I just wouldn't do it. And it's more than likely because my right hemisphere wasn't developing and I just didn't have interest in that kind of stuff. So yeah, and the left brain likes repetition, routine, sameness. So if we have a left weak student, we want to do the same things often. And then maybe once a month, we'll switch it up to a different activity. Where with a right brain weak student, the right brain likes new and different experiences. So we want to do something different. Maybe you could do the same thing 2 or 3 times in a row, and then next week you do something different. And that's not a requirement. That's just kind of it gives you a little more information, and it helps drive that new and different side of the brain. That's what the right side is. So these are some real good physical activities that I would recommend for you guys to do with students, and even do for yourself if you want something to do. So, and we do these presentations. So this one is a little bit more geared towards teachers in the classroom. And I feel like these concepts, anybody could benefit from knowing. And if you guys have some teachers you want to shoot this out to, go for it. So yeah, when we talk about movement, again, that's how the brain grows and matures. And if we think about 1 second, what does medication do? In some cases, it's a stimulant. And what it does is it activates or it gets certain parts of the brain going that aren't able to go on their own. So it needs some sort of chemical stimulation to make that happen. And so what we want to do through movement is get blood flowing through the brain, get all the parts of the body moving and working together. And that does the same thing where it activates certain parts of the brain that couldn't without that movement. So, motor breaks every 10, 15 minutes for a student, especially if they're struggling with either homework or focusing, get them up, get them moving, make it fun. A lot of times, kids start developing a self-image of, oh man, I can't focus, or, all they know is mom is yelling at me all the time. They don't know anything else. All they know is like, I'm a bad kid. Mom yells at me all the time. I always hear no. And yes, that's part of life, is not getting things we want. And that's a good thing. And it's normal for development for them to experience upset. It's actually really good for them to experience that and move on from it. But what we can do is we can understand the student's struggle. We can understand why they're struggling. We know there's a reason for it. It's not just that their behavior's bad. It's that part of their brain isn't functioning. So, hey, let's get them up and let's get them moving. Let's make it fun. Let's have a good charismatic attitude about it and see if that can kind of catch on. And I think that this information that I'm sharing with you guys, again, it should change your mindset from, it's just that the student doesn't want to or can't, to more of a, wow, there's ways to correct this stuff, and let me do all that I can, and let's have a fun time doing it. Just like your job, you can make your job at work, it can be boring and the same stuff over and over, or you can be the life of the party at work and smile and be enthusiastic. And I think that same concept really applies to dealing with our kids or children or anybody that we come in contact with. So you guys can read through some of these notes. I'll kind of breeze through this. I'll leave it up for a second in case somebody needs to screenshot it. There's just certain things that are good to avoid. So there's a note in here about sugar and unhealthy foods. I'll talk about nutrition here in just a moment. So there's some things that are, we want to limit the amount of time that students are playing with their cell phone or playing a computer game or anything. And let's say you have a student that's doing 6 hours of screen time a day. Okay, if we can cut it down to 2, that's a win. We have a rule of thumb for people that we come in contact with, and we tell them, hey, 2 hours of physical activity for each hour of screen time. So if they want 4 hours of screen time, they're going to have to play outside for 8 hours. And a lot of times that's punishment enough. And they're like, so anyway, and it's really good for the brain because screen time, it shuts the brain down. The brain is receiving entertainment or visual input, and we just kind of go brain dead, and we're sitting there looking at it. And it really trains our brain to be sedentary. And we want to train the brain to be moving, to be active, to be creative, to be thinking. So that very bottom note, avoid unnecessary screen time. I think good examples of screen time is if we're watching a family movie together and everybody gets to see the emotions, they get to experience sadness, joy, all those kind of things are actually really great and can be a very good family bonding experience. And I would recommend, if we're going to have extended screen time at all, let's make sure and put breaks in there. For students that have a hard time being pried away from the screen time, they're going to melt down, and the parents may want to avoid doing that because they don't want to cause a fight. and they just got home from work and they're tired, both parents are working, like I mentioned earlier, then let's put a timer out. Let's let the student know, hey, we've got 15 minutes of screen time left, and remind them again at 10 minutes, and we got 8 minutes left, and we got 5, 3 minutes left, 2 minutes left, 1 minute left. Okay, now it's time to go. And if we can do things like that, make the student aware of the sort of the countdown on, hey, we're getting ready to move away and do something different. If they have the startle reflex, a left brain dominance, right brain weakness, and some other things that aren't working out well, it makes that student, it's a lot easier for them to digest the change that's coming versus this, startle reflex and all this stuff that goes on, and they emotionally go through the roof, and creates a snowball of problems after it. So we can kind of use our brain and, think how can we get around some of these challenges that are there for the meantime. And of course, if we ever have the opportunity, then of course we'd like to completely correct the issues. But this right now, what I'm giving you guys, just some takeaways to, some good healthy tips. Again, there's red flags. I think you guys know what red flags are. I'm not going to go through and, read through each and every one of these. Most of the time parents come to us, they're having most of these things. Picky eaters, like I mentioned, walked on their toes. That's, again, a sign that reflex is still there and the rest of the brain's not matured appropriately. If they're very obsessive, or and again, it's normal for kids to be defiant and say no, age 2 to 3, and we expect that, and that's actually good. It shows more independent thinking. And in some cases, we'll have students that never had the terrible twos, and to the parents, they're thinking, oh my God, my kid's an angel. Oh, this is great. Well, guess what? When that kid's 12, 13, 18 years old and they're going through their terrible twos, and their brain is having a hard time maturing, they may stay stuck in that state for a long time. So if you're seeing anything that doesn't line up with normal development, and I would, if you don't have enough information from this presentation, educate yourself. I would, maybe see if you can get a summary of some child development books, or understand when the stages of development happen. I have a couple books I'll tell you about here that can summarize that stuff for you. I'm gonna skip past tips and stats. I'll leave it up just in case somebody wants to screenshot it or review it later. I'm gonna move through this one too. There's a funny one. They say that when the room temperature rises above 74, and reading comprehension and math skills tend to decline a little bit. And part of that is just that whenever the body's a little bit warmer, it's not. So when we're colder, our body is releasing a little bit more adrenaline, some things to help keep us warm. So we're a little bit more alert, and that when we're more alert, obviously we're going to learn better. So there's some interesting notes, and I remember that in school they would always keep it cold in the room, and we would always complain. And anyway, so there is actually a purpose for that, and it really does help. Let's see. So these are the 2 books that are written by the founder of Brain Balance. So if you want to start diving into the science behind what we do, some more of the statistics about childhood neurological disorders, you want to understand how the whole brain matures from the time that they're an infant on, Disconnected Kids is the book for you. The first 5 chapters of it are going to be an explanation of all the different types of issues that students have, left brain weak versus right brain. They give you some real life examples of, right brain weak students usually make it up till 3rd or 4th grade until they start seeing any learning problems, because they're able to, with their left brain, which is so smart, they're able to memorize things and not have to study or pay attention. But by the time they hit 3rd or 4th grade, stuff is a little more complex. A lot of times they don't get comprehension or whatever at that point. So there's some good real life examples in there that would maybe help sink some of this information in a little bit better than I'm able to do in this 30, 45 minute presentation. So and then the next book is Reconnected Kids. That's more for when a parent is going through brain balance, or let's say they're trying to do some stuff at home and they need to understand the stages of development. Well, the first 5 or 6 chapters are just really a review of Disconnected Kids. Chapter 7 through the rest of the book outlines child development age 0 to 6 months, behavior, cognition, emotions, 6 months to a year, year to 2 years, and it does it year by year all the way up until 14 to 18 years old. And it's nice to understand what's normal for a 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old, because if we have a student who's behind maturity-wise in their brain and they're age 12 or 13 and they're acting like a 3 or 4-year-old, well, okay, it's good to understand that stage and the stages that come after it, so that as they start going through these stages, you can say, they're starting to mature. And that's a very, very positive sign. So that's the 2 books. Now, these are for anybody. If you guys have you guys ever seen these books before?
No.
Okay. So I would recommend definitely getting a copy of each of these books. give you even better and more detailed examples than we give you in kind of our to-do list. And it really just helps you understand, how does a child think? And we're not thinking about necessarily child psychology. It's just, for example, when a student has to tell you about an experience over and over and over and over, to the parent, it's like, it's annoying. It looks like a behavior problem. Like, stop bothering me, or they don't notice that they're bothering you. And really what's going on is, to process emotions, they have to experience and go and talk through it several times. And we have to kind of connect the emotional, which is the right side of the brain, to logic. We have to help them be able to digest and understand what happened, why did it happen? And they may have to tell us that story 10 times before they're able to actually process that emotion. So understanding those types of things about children, it gives everybody tools that they can use. And it really allows us to go back, because we don't remember what it was like to be a kid. I like to joke around and say I'm a big kid myself, which helps me relate to some of the students here and other people. But at the foundational level, I'm 30. I don't remember everything that happened when I was 5 or 6. And so if I'm dealing with a much younger student, these kind of books give us ways to help kids connect ideas. And again, the goal for us is to make sure that the student or the person is matured appropriately, so that they can make it through elementary, middle, high school, either college or trade school, have a successful relationship with somebody at some point, and live a happy and productive life. And then at the very least, even if we're not going for that full long-term goal, that they'll have a better quality of life in the meantime. And we've seen some stuff with students that went through our program. I'm going to pull up, and that's, as far as information goes, that's it. I'm going to flip through, and thank you for listening to me. You guys have been a great audience. So let me see if I can exit out of here. And I'm going to show you guys a student that went through our program. And he went through our center. So I just want to make sure and clarify that, because sometimes you can, with a, let's say a supplement or something out there, it's like one person somewhere had a really good experience with it. This is a student that actually went through our centers. So this isn't somebody that, it's not just like a random student from somewhere USA. And his mom gave us permission to share this stuff. So I'm going to pull this up. And I like to show and tell parents that after going through our program, students look different. We may have some kids that have some neurological issues, or whatever's going on, and they have sort of like a little bit of an off smile, like they might be a little off to one side. That's just how they smile. And it's really awesome, because even after like a month or two, we're starting to see now they have a regular, because their brain and their muscles and everything are working together better. So this student's name is Nico, and his mom put the little baby picture in there. I think she did a great job with this. Now, taking one step back, so this mom, if you guys look down here, I'll just kind of highlight this. They did 7 years of physical, occupational, and speech therapy, and they saw some changes, and it helped him. Those things are good. And obviously, brain balance is much more effective than these traditional methods in overcoming obstacles. So we try not to say anything negative about anybody else, but we just know that they did all this stuff for a long time. And I'm sure that cost thousands and thousands of dollars, and it's worth it because it's their child. They want to do, they don't care. Mama bear don't care. She's going to make sure that that kid's got everything they need. And so they did a lot of stuff before they came to brain balance, and they knew there was that he still had a gap. He wasn't making academic progress. He could not socialize with other kids. He was so scared. He would always hide behind his parents whenever somebody new was in the room. He couldn't chew. So let me scroll down to these pictures. I just like to show people that kids look different after going through our program. Anyway, long story short, mom said she was a big skeptic, right there at the top of the screen. So dad checked us out. Sorry, the top of my screen is kind of fuzzy. There we go. Mom was a big skeptic. After they spent thousands of dollars in therapy, tutors, specialists, they felt like, oh, well, if brain balance can do all this stuff, why isn't everybody doing it? And she was, like she said, she's happy to say she was wrong. They started seeing changes right away, but and the pictures I'm going to show you, you're going to see growth. You're going to be, wow, that's amazing. But we're not so worried about how the student looks. Like right here, mom mentions his facial features changed. He started getting stronger. He was able to focus. He started to have more patience and grasping school concepts. His confidence exploded. I remember he would actually start looking me in the eyes. That's a big deal. Normally, when they walked into a room, he'd hide behind his mom or dad. Now he's the first one to say hello, look people in the eye, talk. He started loving music. He started loving classical music. He can name composers. He's got friends. Oh my gosh. For parents, for a child who's 10, 11, 12 years old, that's never had friends, or just, nobody wants to socialize with them, that's devastating. You can't help but feel bad for your child. And so for us to be able to create these changes for these families, this is what we live for. That's why we're not afraid to share this information. That's why we're not, not stingy with it. We want everybody to benefit from this stuff because it works. So, and he ended up growing 5 inches, but here come the pictures. So, so this is Nico when he started our program. He's 12 years old. I'm going to try to zoom in, hopefully not too much. So this is Nico when he started our program. And if you notice his facial features right here, so he can't chew or swallow. His foods are all blended. And he's probably been in our program a couple weeks, because every time they get a star is when they've moved up a grade level in the neuroacademic room. And we're working on the right hemisphere of his brain. So drawing conclusions down there is a right brain academic skill. So we're starting to see, after a couple of months into the program, he's starting to look different, and this isn't it. And I like to, again, going back to that playing the skeptic thing, I like to, tell parents, okay, maybe with Photoshop and he got a tan, we're starting to see some differences or whatever. But after he was in the program for about 5 months, he ended up growing 6 inches. And this kid over here you see on the right is the same kid that you saw in that first picture. So I don't know if I'm in there. I'm going to try to, hold on one second. Yeah. So this kid that you're seeing up top is the same kid that you saw 5 inches taller 6 months later. And the thing is, we're not looking to say every kid is going to grow 5 inches in brain balance. We just want to help you guys understand that we have such a comprehensive understanding of how the brain matures, how it develops, all the factors that can control that. And that's why we are able to create these results where, 7 years of all this therapy, neurologists, nutrition, all the stuff they'd already been doing wasn't creating those changes. And one time I shared this information with the doctor's office, and they go, "Oh, you guys do nutrition in your program." And I didn't rebuttal at that moment. I guess I was kind of caught off guard because I wasn't really expecting it. But later on, you know how you always you think of something to say later. Later on, I was like, actually, no, because he was already seeing a neurologist. They had him on special proteins and supplements and omegas. So he was already doing nutrition. That was something that he was already doing. And so you can't tell me that within 6 months, him growing 5 inches and seeing those changes more changes that they could have created in 7 years in a matter of 6 months, you can't tell me it wasn't brain balance. There's just no way. So anyway, so that was the little testimony. I don't always share that with people, but I felt like maybe in this setting, that would be a good, because we want to give you guys the head knowledge of what's going on, where these issues are coming from with many students, what can be done to change that. And then, we also like to see some real life examples, not just Frank talking and telling you all this stuff, or talking about my little brother and all that kind of stuff. So as far as the information I had to share, I think that was pretty much it. And I will open the floor to questions if you guys have any.
Thank you. That was very comprehensive and really, really interesting. Does anybody else, does anyone have any questions?
I do. Hello, Frank. I'm Shelly.
Hey, Shelly.
Hey, I have a question. Have you guys ever worked with a child with vision impairment? My daughter she does have a neurological disorder, although she's not academically delayed. We're still working on, her diagnosis per se, but they think it was genetic as well as viral, like kind of the perfect storm.
Okay.
But she's very legally blind. I mean, she's 100% Braille reader. So
wow.
All of the things that you discussed, a lot of the things I noticed in her, and I think a lot of her development maybe wasn't able to happen because of the lack of vision. So I was just wondering if you have had any,
sure,
experience with that.
Exactly. And just like in many cases where I bet there are a lot of people out there that their brain, they have a few primitives and their brain doesn't balance 100%, but they're pretty much okay because they're able to compensate for it.
Right.
I would say that I'm that way. I rely more on memory, more details, facts, things like that. That helps me out. And so I think humans, we are masters of compensation, and we know that students that are blind, their hearing and some of their other senses generally are quite a bit stronger as a way to compensate. Now, I would say that even in that case, because I think sense of touch or tactile and balance, as well as auditory processing, are all also so key. And it's not just that they're able to detect, but we want to make sure that they're fully matured. Now, usually vision and balance work together, but in the case where we don't have vision and balance work together, that will hinder the student's ability to just in normal life be able to take advantage of some of those things like, jumping on a trampoline, balancing on a rocker board, those kind of things. And there are activities that you can do that will help stimulate those. And I think it would, potentially even without vision, because there's so many other senses, would be worth looking into. So we have had students talking about visual impairment that just have a permanent nystagmus where the eyes are going back and forth.
She has that as well.
Okay, and we've seen improvements in that. A nystagmus is basically a visual reflex, and one of the things that we do in our assessment is we have the spinning chair, where we spin the student, we spin them 10 times to the right and stop them, and we have them open their eyes and look up, and we want to see a nystagmus at that point for about 9 seconds, and then the eyes should stop. So that's one way we calculate left or right brain weakness.
Oh, wow.
And that's also in our program because we have multi-sensory stimulation going on, typically visual, but at least in your case, maybe auditory and tactile simultaneously at the same time as they're activating their vestibular system or using the spinning chair.
Right.
So yeah, I would say that, again, and there are some cases where with the vision and that kind of stuff, obviously we'll be limited on what kind of improvements we can make there.
Oh, sure. I really meant developmentally. It's funny, you mentioned the little boy that you showed the pictures of. Our daughter smiles more on one side, and she is a master of compensation. So sometimes it's hard to detect, but even like, her balance is off, and of course vision plays a part in that, but she's very active, does a ton of gross motor. So she's been able to work on that, but I'm sure there's room for huge improvement on some of these things that had she been sighted, maybe she would have been able to do on her own, or maybe not. I don't, but I'm wondering if we could be more balanced, it might make the lack of vision easier, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and at the very least, have her functioning at a higher level, and
that's exactly
in regards that we can. And the thing that we're phenomenal at is we can take a student who's at 0%, or actually in some cases sort of sub 0% on certain functions, and we can work it until we get to level 0, and then we move up to level 1, 2, all the way up to level 15. So we're able to find a way to meet the student where they're at, work at the most foundational level possible, which normal life isn't going to provide you. School's not going to provide you because they're already so far ahead, and there's they don't know what the problem is, and 2, they don't have the tools necessary to do that. So yeah, I would say that we'd be happy to try to help you guys out.
Okay, thank you.
For sure. Cool. Thanks for the questions.
Any other questions?
This is Eileen. Sorry if it's hard to hear me. I'm driving. I just wanted to, hi Frankie. Great presentation. Thank you for doing this. I just wanted to throw out there that our son John has been through the program at the Cedar Park Center. So if there's any parents on or anyone who listens to this later on, and you want to speak to someone directly who's been through the program, please feel free to contact us. And I also have copies of both of the books that Frankie mentioned, The Disconnected Kids and Reconnected. So I can bring those to I'll bring them to the CC4C office and leave them there for whoever would like to take a look at them.
Oh, that's nice. Thanks.
Cool. So that's pretty much all the information I have. And I know I didn't get to do much of an introductory thing, but so CC4C, how long has that been around?
Since 2012.
Okay. That's about the same, about a year after my little brother went through the program. So for a good amount of time now. That's awesome. Well, I'm glad you guys do that for kids. And if there's anything that we can do, again, offer any kind of freebie services or help you guys out, let us know, because the only thing we care about is helping these kids change. And it's just so rewarding. I remember my kindergarten or first grade teacher, at the end of the year, she was really sad because we were going away, and she has that emotional attachment to us. But we sort of have that same thing, except we have that experience kind of on steroids here, because we're making years worth of changes in a matter of months. And we see these kids who couldn't do certain things, now all of a sudden they can. Parents are ballistic happy, and you know, and we only see them for anywhere from 3 to 6 months. So it is kind of sad for us too when they go, but we are all about making the changes for these kids, and again, any way we can help you guys, just let us know.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Well, we certainly appreciate it, and I will send I'll send this video to you, and I'm going to send it out to everybody because I know there's a lot of people on that were interested in being on, but just couldn't because of the time. So I'll send them a copy of it to all our families.
Nice.
And maybe coming to see you for Michael. So, are you at the Cedar Park, or are you at the Westlake location?
What was that?
Are you in Cedar Park, or are you in the Westlake location?
We're in Cedar Park. Actually, I ran the Westlake location from 2013 to 2016, and so we actually, because most of our clients were coming from up north, we actually closed that center, and the folks from San Antonio decided to try their hand at it, so they've reopened it.
Okay.
And we have a working relationship going with them. The only, again, trying not to say anything negative, the Hutto location, we don't have a working relationship with them. Like, we try to reach out to them and just, hey, neighbors, whatever, and they don't return our calls. And so, but yeah, the folks in Austin, I would trust them with my kids. I know that obviously we, you know, I don't know, like doing a pre-screen and some of those other free things that we offer, I don't think other brain balances really do that. That's something that just me, like,
right.
personally, I've decided to do without asking for permission. I'm just like, I'm doing it because I want to help these kids. So yeah, either way, the brain balance program is the same pretty much everywhere. It's just who are you interacting with and what kind of experience level do they have.
Right. Okay. Okay. Where are you in Cedar Park?
So if you've been to 1431 and in Palmer, there's a Walmart and HEB. We're literally right next to that.
Okay.
So we're not too far. And typically for the services that we provide, I know based on many of the clients that we've seen that they'll fly out of state to go see a doctor, and they'll spend thousands in airfare. You know, they'll go to Dallas, they'll go to Houston, they'll go all these other places to see a specialist. And again, I think those things are good things. But when we go back to sort of what the value of our program is, it's like, you know, it's worth 8 times what we charge for it. And the results that we get are anywhere from 10 to 100 times the results that you get through any other method. So I find that, you know, we used to have parents when I was in Austin drive from Salado, Waco.
Oh, wow.
Had a family move from China to do the brain balance program.
My goodness.
There was a family that lived in Oregon, and now, of course, dad's a helicopter pilot, mom is an artist or something. And, they must have $1 bazillion. They moved down here temporarily to do brain balance, even though they're still in California, just because of my mom and her thing. So, but yeah, any which way, that's my goal, is just to educate you guys, let you guys know that yes, there are answers to these problems, and in many cases, we can make it where the student doesn't have to suffer with them anymore, based on the doctor who designed our program.
Okay.
So.
Well, great. Excellent. Well, thank you again for your time and for all the information. It's very valuable, I think, to a lot of us. So we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks
guys.
so much.
All right, we'll talk to you.